Welcome to On The Drivée podcast. My name is Jordan, and I am your host this week for our Hungarian Grand Prix recap. It's just me today, and next week, Ames will be back, and it's going to be both of us. And I'm super excited because this weekend was such an amazing weekend. I ended up watching the Hungarian Grand Prix twice because the first time I watched it, I was actually at the London E-Prix for Formula E, and I, like everybody else, was just watching on a phone or an iPad while I was at the track. But then after I came home the next day, I did come home and I watched the full race. And for all of you who got to watch that for the first time in like the comfort of your home or like in a very fun, lively environment, I'm very jealous. It was very nice to watch it with friends, but I really couldn't hear anything. I couldn't hear all the radio messages. And I think one of the things about the Hungarian Grand Prix is that it was so juicy and the radio messages were intense to say the least. But we are going to get into all of that and so much more. And I cannot wait to talk about this race.
You've got a problem, change your fucking car.
It's lights out and away we go!
The first thing I want to do is talk about who finished where. Oscar Piastri finished first, followed by Lando Norris, and then Lewis Hamilton. This was Lewis's 200th podium. I want to get that out of the way. And it was Oscar's very first race win, which is an amazing thing for the McLaren team. It's an amazing thing for Oscar Piastri as a driver. And while it was a very contentious race, it is also amazing that he got his first race win in Formula One. Now, we will get to that race win and all of that went into it moving forward, but I want to start with the less juicy bits. First off, let's start with all of the drama at Williams that's going on right now. If you've missed it, there's been some news, or if you've missed it, there's been some rumors coming out of the Williams garage that Logan Sargent and James Vowles are not on speaking terms. And I think with the Williams team, the cracks are starting to show. We are really seeing how that team is breaking down a bit. What we're really starting to see is that not only the team breaking down, but also some issues with tire strategy, some issues with tire management. The car is just not where it needs to be, and they're getting passed by a lot of the other teams, and it's going to make that really difficult for them to finish higher in the standings for the teams this season. Constructors' Championship points are going to be very sparse this season with how tight the front of the grid is, and Williams can't really afford to not finishing the points at least once or twice this year for a couple more times. And I think with the struggles they've had, I don't even think it's a Logan issue. I think it's more of a team issue. I think it's the car. It's because Alex is having the same issues as Logan, and Alex and Logan are both starting in similar places on the grid. They're not having drastically different laps in qualifying as much anymore since they do have the same car now. And I think the cracks in the team are just starting to really become more evident in terms of how the team is actually positioning the car, what's going into the setup, how good the car is compared to the other teams, and how capable are they of financing and bringing upgrades to the races like the other teams are. And I think as the season goes on, and especially after summer break, I think that will really make or break what happens with Williams for the rest of the season. Some other big news, if you've missed it, Mattia Binotto is back. He is going to be replacing Andreas Seidel at Stake F1, which is now going to be moving towards Audi. The team, Stake F1, is going to be switching to Audi. Andreas Seidel is going to be removed and replaced by Mattia Binotto moving forward. And this is probably going to be one of the many shakeups that we're going to see at that team, especially as Sauber turns into the Audi takeover. If you're a Red Bull fan, please pause now or skip the next 30 seconds. If you're a Red Bull fan, please skip the next 30 seconds. This will not be good news for you. 1, Max Verstappen is taking a 10-place grid penalty for Belgium. And 2, Checo Perez has dropped below the top 5, and he is also more than 100 points behind Max, which, if the rumors are true, he will be eligible for them to exercise their break clause in his contract. I think similarly to Williams, the cracks in the Red Bull team are starting to appear. And this is not exclusive to how Max is talking to people on that team. And I think that's something that I will discuss in just a moment. But I think it's also in terms of how the car's progression is going. They've dropped so much since the beginning of the season, being so far ahead of everybody last season. And I think it's really starting to show in terms of how much pace they've lost. Every other team is so much more competitive. Like the gains that McLaren has made recently, Mercedes has made significant gains. And I think Red Bull will continue to struggle the rest of the season. And it's going to be really interesting to see how this all shakes out. And I think it will start showing some bigger cracks in Max, in Checo, and their performance going forward. And so it's going to be a very tight championship for the rest of the grid. Speaking of Max, let's get into the juicy bits that happened last week. Max Verstappen made headlines again for how he spoke to his race engineer GP during the Hungarian Grand Prix. If you've missed it, those race messages were not great, to be frank about it. And one of the things about Max is that he is known for his temper. The difference between this race and some of the other races where you've seen that temper kind of flare is that this race, it was directed at his team rather than somebody else. Especially once Lewis and Max ran into each other, especially once Lewis and Max crashed in Hungary, it became very apparent how frustrated he was with the race, how frustrated he is with the car. There were comments made all weekend about the car and his setup and how fast they were or how slow they were all season. And I think Max's frustration with the car and their pace, or lack thereof, honestly, is going to remain a situation that will need to be handled. While Red Bull is attributing some of this to him staying up very late because of his sim racing, he will not be doing that moving forward. They have said that he is not allowed to do them right before a race and stay up super late the night before. Because if you don't know, Max was up doing a 24-hour sim race the night before. He was doing his shift in that race, and that is a lot of driving to do when you have to do a Formula One car as well. I think Max's performance has not changed in terms of how good of a driver he is. I think the car is just drastically slowed and the other teams are catching up. And so it'll be interesting to see how Max's temper and how he reacts to the rest of the season, especially if it doesn't go Red Bull's way the entire time, which I don't see it being their race every race. I think it'll be very interesting to see how this goes down, because he was upset with Lewis when he and Lewis crashed, even though he took the turn poorly. And it was just not, I think with Max, he was upset with Lewis. He made some comments. And while Lewis didn't really rise to the level of that, it was also evident that he was just like, there's hostility there. And he didn't know why. And I don't think that hostility was warranted if you see the replay of the crash, but I am glad that Max is okay and he was able to finish the race, because that is a very dangerous kind of lunge he's taken. And I'm also very glad that Lewis is okay, because it gave me flashbacks. Because I don't know about you, but it gave me flashbacks. And I definitely did not want a repeat of that. Speaking of Lewis Hamilton got his 200th podium, as I said earlier, which is super exciting for him. And I'm really excited to see how the rest of the season goes for him. Coming fresh off a win at Silverstone, a third place finish at the Hungaroring is just what he needed. And I think it's really starting to see him shine again. And I love that for him, especially as it's his last season with Mercedes. He's going to Ferrari next season. And while Ferrari is not doing very well and they're doing Ferrari things right now, I think that it will be interesting to see how it goes and plays out for him there. And I think this little boost of confidence is what he needs to leave Mercedes on a high note. And I love that for him. George Russell did not have the best of weekends, but he did finish in the points, which I think, considering where he qualified, was a strong finish. And I think George is going to have a great season as well, because I think that Mercedes can be very competitive when it is in a good place, or it has a great setup, or they have the tires in the right window. But I think what Lewis was saying earlier on in the weekend about how the Mercedes is very strong when it's not as hot is definitely going to play a role in the rest of their season. Before I talk about what happened at McLaren, I am going to talk about what happened with the Aston Martin team. If you've missed it, there was a bit of a contentious spat between Fernando Alonso and the FIA, because the FIA called him into Park Ferme after Yuki Tsunoda's crash during qualifying, despite there being time left on the board. And it was because they mistook his car for the Apex GP car, which is the fake F1 team car for that Brad Pitt movie. And it caused him to not go back out for qualifying. It is insane to me, to be honest, that happened. And I'm incredibly surprised that there were no repercussions for whoever called him in. I understand his frustration. I don't think he should have thrown a jacket at anybody. Like, that's just childish behavior. But like, I understand the frustration and I sympathize with it. I don't think the reaction was great, but it also does make sense. And there was one other thing at the end of the race. Alonso let Lance pass and was supposed to give back the place if he did not catch up. And he did not catch up, but he did not give the place back. And so we had some contentious teammate activities at Aston Martin this weekend, which I think is a great segue into talking about what happened at McLaren. Now, I have my opinions on what happened with McLaren this weekend, and I know everybody does. When I was watching it with everybody at Formula E, one of the things I saw was that people were just so split on this. No one was in agreement on whether Lando was in the right or Oscar was in the right, whether Lando should have let him pass or if Lando should have just kept going. And I think one thing that is kind of consistent, I think one thing that's consistent across everybody is that Lando's reaction to Oscar's win was not okay. There was no champagne spray, throwing up the hat, all of those things. And while you can be upset, it's the first race win of your teammate. Oscar could have been just as upset after Miami and not celebrated Lando's first race win, because in reality, Oscar should have won that race. He was the faster car that weekend, and then he had the little tangle, and they had the bad pit stop and the safety car, and Lando won. Oscar could have been just as upset that weekend, but he wasn't, and he celebrated with Lando. It was a whole different situation. It was a different vibe. It was a different atmosphere, and I think it shows how Lando reacts in those situations, and it's not great. It's not how you win with a team. It's not how you take on those kinds of situations. But I think on the flip side of it, I don't know many people who would have stopped and given the place back. Granted, the majority of the blame is on McLaren. McLaren should not have pitted Oscar second. I still don't know why they let Lando undercut him to begin with. It did not make sense, only to ask him to give the place back, because if your stop is not as great, or if something happens, you've completely lost in that moment. I don't know if they were waiting for a possible safety car and just hoping that would come and save him, but it was just poor decision making. And I think the decision making and strategy at McLaren has cost them multiple times recently. And if they don't figure this out, it will continue to cost them for the rest of the season. And it will cause additional teammate strife between Lando and Oscar, who in reality should be working together, because McLaren is a very strong team. They have two very strong drivers who should be working together to win a championship, or at least a constructors championship. I think Lando should have given the place back earlier and then just retaken Oscar. He was obviously the faster car. He was proving a point, and it shouldn't have had to be proven. But if he had given the place back initially, he probably could have just overtaken him. The team might have instituted team orders and said, no, you need to protect him, which also would have been perfectly fair. If they decided that that's Oscar's win, that's Oscar's win. And that's just how the team runs and the cookie crumbles. And I think hearing back the messages was really frustrating, because all you want is your driver to win and your driver to have a great race. But then ultimately what you're seeing is that his teammate doesn't want that. And I think it was really shocking to hear the race messages between Lando and his engineer and the team just begging him, give the place back, please. And I don't wish that for Oscar's first race win. I think his next one will be great. And I hope that for him, and I hope the team does a lot better then, and it's not one of these not questionable wins, but just a contentious win. And I hope that Oscar is able to enjoy this win. I hope his friends and family are able to help him enjoy this win, because he deserved it. He's been a great driver all season, and he's going to have many, many more wins in Formula One. And I do hope that McLaren, one, gets it together in terms of the strategy, but two, also gets it together in terms of this is how we're handling this in team orders wise, if it comes down to it, because you have two great drivers. Having them fight like this is not going to benefit anybody, and all it's going to do is allow the other teams to come back and possibly beat you at a constructor championship and or a driver's championship, which I think is definitely still on the cards for them this season. That is my entire race recap for this week. I will be back next week with my lovely co-host for this. I'll be back next week with my lovely co-host for the Belgian Grand Prix next week, also known as Spa. So please come back next week for more. And until then, I will see you guys later. Bye.
You've got a problem, change your fucking car.
It's lights out and away we go!